Hello, so this is Kayla Bryson and Dr. Condi's mental skills training course. I'm here again with Eric Ellison. So last time we discussed goal setting and mental toughness. What are one or two things that you remember from that discussion?
I remember the importance of setting goals and just to be reasonable with yourself, but delicately balancing being reasonable and challenging yourself to reach a new height.
Absolutely. Like we want the goals to be functional and attainable at the same time, but still like pushing them to be able to achieve it and find that new success. So this discussion, we're going to be focusing on focus, attention, concentration, and a little bit of imagery as well. So along with those three that I mentioned first, distractions can be the biggest detriment to an athlete in sports. They can be consistent as well if an athlete lets them be, and maintaining a positive and fully connected focus in distractions is important. So there are two types of distractions that can happen, both internal and external, sorry. Internal is when an individual is telling themselves, that can be self-talk, just their inner thoughts. Then what they do before and after a game, so like what routines they may set for themselves, and then quality of life that they may have while they're competing in sports. That can be a huge distraction if they've had maybe a bad day with family. For adolescent athletes, if they're in school and they had a bad day at school, that can be a distractor. Then for external distractors, stem from the environment or in-game variables that dictate outcome of performance. These could be teammates, competitors, game officials, and the crowd noise as well. So based on those that I just listed, how have you handled distractions either currently or in the past?
With distractions, you've first of all got to recognize them as distractions. Notice that they're there, identify them, and then just think of ways to block them out. I think one of the most important things is to just focus on your goal. That's what I've done in the past. Is, like I said, first recognize the distractions and then just redirect your focus towards what's important and essentially just look for ways to overcome the distractions or completely disregard them altogether.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned like disregard them. Like how would you like think that process would go in terms of disregarding a distraction?
Well, it depends on the distraction. An easy one that seems to fit most situations is understanding or thinking about if you can actually control what's going on. And most of the time, at least in my experience, it's a no. So with that understanding, I mean, it's a cold hard truth, but with that understanding, I mean, there's nothing you can do. So you've got to move on and just let it be, and then let it exit your mind and just focus on the task at hand.
Yeah, I've seen, especially in the group of athletes and that I coach in their age group, that can be very difficult for them to do. They think the one mistake that they've made or just something that the crowd may have said to them, that's dictating their performance for the rest of the game, and not realizing that, yeah, plays move on, or there's still a whole 7 minutes of a quarter left that they have to worry about. So just being able to analyze that and being, as we talked about last time, mentally tough enough to not let it phase you.
Mm-hmm.
So another question for you. Between the internal and external distractions, which do you believe is most detrimental to either performance in general or your specific performance?
In my experience, I would say the internal for a couple of reasons. First of all, the external distractions can stop, if you leave the premises or you distance yourself from that distraction, but the internal ones can follow you wherever you go. Even when you're not busy with the task at hand and you're sitting on the bench or whatever it may be, those distractions internally can follow you. So I think it should take a great discipline to work those out and just maintain the focus.
I like those suggestions. So within distractions, a couple strategies used against it are attention and concentration, and along with focus, as I said. Now, all three of those have subtle differences. What do you think the differences are between those three?
Between attention, focus, and what else? Imagery,
And concentration.
concentration. So attention. That's a good question. I feel like all my answers are gonna swim together. Attention, I would say, is kind of what grabs, like impulsive almost. Quick fire, rapid fire, just what catches your attention. That's what I think of when I think of the word attention. With focus, I feel like that's a like a concerted effort to focus and put your all your energy into one item, one task. And maybe even look at it as brainstorming and just looking at a way to overcome or complete the task at hand or the challenge. And then concentration, I would say, would be just staying on task, with your game plan, your execution. So yeah, focus, I would say, would be more of a general like plan of attack phase, but concentration is more like stay the course, lock in, get into a flow state, and take care of it.
Yeah, those answers are very close to their actual definitions, actually. So with focus, it's how you were talking about it. It's focusing on the one specific stimulus when you're exposed to multiple at one time. So it's the perception and responses to cues depending on the context. That could be both physically and mentally with focus. Then attention is the same thing, like picking out particular and the relevant stimulus at a time when it's maybe simultaneous thoughts or an object is exposed to you. So like we both know a lot about basketball. So like if someone's on offense and they have a defender coming towards them, then they are anticipating maybe what the secondary defenders are going to be doing. But at that moment, they're worried about that initial defender that's on them. So that's the particular stimulus they're focused on at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And then concentration, that definition has 4 parts to it, actually. So the first one is focusing on the relevant cues in the environment. Second one is maintaining attentional focus over a period of time. The third is having awareness of the situation and performance errors. And then the fourth is shifting attentional focus whenever necessary. So for like a visual representation of that, let me share my screen with you. It's here. So this here is kind of a visual of the level of awareness with distractions. So the main kind of inner one is focused there. So that could be the direction which perspectives are shifted to execute a task. Then you get a little bit more broader with attention, and that's taking positions of the mind and remaining focused on one object out of several options. And then in the bigger picture of it all is concentration, which was the ability to maintain focus on relevant cues. Any thoughts or questions about this? Just the concepts or even this visual representation of it?
The only thing I notice, only takeaway that I find interesting is that focus is in the middle of it all, but the other two potentially include focus. So they kind of build on each other. Like focus is at the root of all of it,
Mm-hmm.
but it branches out into attention and then concentration, which envelops all three.
Absolutely. Like there can be, like we can all concentrate on something specifically, but like reading, for instance, like we're all going to read the words on paper, but are we like internalizing the words that we're reading? Because found multiple times myself, like I may be zoned out mentally thinking of something else while I'm still reading a passage or anything, but haven't necessarily comprehended it. So in that moment, the attention and focus come into play. Like I am concentrated on reading, at least that's the task I'm completing, but am I really attentive to the situation or focusing on it at that moment?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, wanted to show you that. So take this back. So now the next thing I would like to talk about is there's a attentional model with all of these things that has been described. So that could be in both between a width and a directional concept. With width, it's the external and internal that I mentioned before, and then directional could be broad and narrow. So external is direction that attends toward an object in the environment. Then internal is the inward thoughts and feelings. Broad attentional focus allows a person to perceive multiple occurrences simultaneously. And then the narrow attentional focus is responding to the 1 to 2 cues in that moment. Another technique against these three, they go both cognitive and emotionally and behaviorally can be attacked. Mindfulness is a cognitive approach. That is just the present moment focus. That could also look like meditation. That could help with mindfulness. Then there's an activity called a quiet eye period, which is the emotional side of it. That is the final fixation on a target before the initiation of movement is done. So the biggest example I commonly use is at the free throw line. Like, what is the athlete looking at before the ball releases their hands? And then behaviorally, a mental skills program can be established. So that can be tailored toward their strengths and weaknesses, can also include goal setting, and can be used with routines and relaxation again. Arousal has been a hot topic in this course that I've been taking a lot, and having where athletes maybe a lot of the time their arousal has to be lowered, but then also the arousal needs to be raised. Some athletes may not be at the same energy level that they need to be at to compete in competition. So any thoughts or questions about that?
I just that last part about arousal that you talked about. I think that it is interesting that you can, like, one athlete in the same game on the same court can have arousal towards the incorrect item or object in the game as far as the objective of being, the winner goes. And one person can have the same arousal but to a completely different object or item. And one of them can be the winner, therefore, and one of them can therefore be the loser. So just because you have that arousal or that focus or that curiosity or attention on one item doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be the winner or the best on the court, because you could be focusing on the entirely wrong thing. And I think that that's one of the keys is in those stages where you're trying to figure out what to focus on and what to dive into and narrow down on your attention and your focus, is to just determine, what is the most important thing for you to focus your attention on to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could be very difficult to develop, especially when you're being exposed to so much at one time. Like the girls I coach, we just had a few games this past weekend, and we played 3 in one day, and just the progression from that very first one, all the nervousness and anxiety that occurred even before the game started and while it was happening. Then between that third, like they understood what the task needed to be and what was important to focus on and what wasn't. But it can be hard to decipher between, like, okay, do I need to focus on this right now, or is that just not anything to be worried about? So I like I have found learning in this course that that's very interesting as well, with the arousal piece of it. So now the next topic is imagery. Just without even diving into anything yet, what do you consider imagery to be in a sporting context?
Well, based off our previous conversation, building off of that, when I think of imagery, I think of visualization. So setting goals is one thing, but actually visualizing you achieving that goal takes things to a whole nother level, innately. And for your essentially the placebo effect to almost take place in a way, I think that visualization is key to realizing your dreams, your goals, and in this case, your focus.
Mhm. Yeah, we've seen imagery be a form of simulation that takes place, but it's usually in the mind and can incorporate all five senses. Um, just even to start, it could be developed in the last 5 to 10 minutes, and like its function is typically just to build confidence when faced with adversity. Um, one little task can be visualized in someone's mind, and at that point, they're even more advanced at being able to execute it than they were before, not using imagery. And I think this is as well beneficial to those types of learners that are visual people, either it being executed in front of them or them running through it in their minds. That could be a huge task to be done. Then, with the characteristics of imagery and its process, those this includes modality, which is the five senses, as I mentioned, then perspective, which can take on a first person or third person perspective, and then the angle within that perspective, especially an external one, can be viewed from the front, behind, above, or the side of the play or physical skill. Then agency is oneself or another person can be the author or the agent of the behavior being imagined. So just the behavior being initiated, whoever is the agency, or we can, there's another term for it, a stakeholder in that instance. And then the final characteristic is deliberation. The trigger for imagery can either be deliberate or spontaneous. So if we're telling an athlete specifically to imagine this, then that's they are told to imagine it rather than doing it on their own. Any thoughts or questions about those concepts?
Once again, just that last point that you brought up about an instructor and or a coach, inserting that visualization or that imagery and suggesting or forcing the athlete to focus on something, it's entirely different than if it comes from within. And this once again goes back to our previous conversation about goal setting and just the drive and desire to achieve a goal. If the desire doesn't start from within, then in my experience, there's a very slim chance you're going to see that goal through. Just because at that point you're doing it for someone else, for something else. There's not really much of a drive or an incentive for yourself. It's just not as worth your while. You haven't sold yourself and bought into it fully.
Yeah, that motivation piece is the biggest factor, either like intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. Um, a lot of the time, imagery gets used for athletes that are recovering from an image or an injury, and using imagery to picture themselves. Okay, what do I want to look like post injury, and maybe even how is my performance going to be better than what it was before. I have an athlete right now that is injured with an ankle injury, and it's not necessarily expected, no expectation of when she'll be back, but challenging herself to know, okay, what am I going to do differently or better to possibly prevent the injury from happening or be a contributing factor to the team, knowing that she's been out for a few weeks already. Um, now I
Well,
have, oh, go
I
ahead.
would even take it a step further. I would say that as an athlete, of course, I would hope your goal is to be the most dominant athlete on that field or on that court in that game. And to take it a step further, as I'm saying, with imagery and visualization, if you are in basketball and you're in a game, whoever your favorite player is, hopefully they're one of the elites, but you're gonna strive or reach for their quality of play, their level of play and mastery. Um, and so I think what a lot of us find ourselves doing just naturally, it's only natural, is to essentially emulate them or try and model our game or our habits or behavior after them. Um, and I think that that's a huge part of imagery, just because you have a great example in that situation, and that that's something you want to align yourself with, and you just are given an automatic, easy in roadmap to follow. And I think that's a huge advantage if you can learn to do that, especially in the middle of a game.
Mhm. Yeah, the concept that comes to mind when we talk about that is modeling. And we have athletes, they are watching college and professional players, and they see their performance and then want to emulate that in their own, but may not technically or skillfully be there yet. But it's that transition between seeing it on the TV or on the court in person and then them physically having to execute it. I think that's where imagery comes, that in between factor of the transition between that. Now, there's a little activity involved in imagery that I would like to share with you. Let's see. So yeah, this is just an imagery script. So based on those five senses, or based on the five senses, in a sport or activity, can you list off like each individual sense that would be involved in that activity, sport skill?
Well, I'm not quite sure what olfactory is, so if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, that would be touch.
Okay. All right. So, what just comes natural is thinking of a basketball setting. So visually, say you're taking a ball up court, you're going to be scanning for defenders, reading the defense, looking for holes in the defense to score, maybe thread a pass, maybe drive to the hoop yourself, or take a jump shot somewhere on the floor. Auditory, you're listening. You should be listening for communication from your teammates. You should be communicating yourself and listening for that to be reciprocated from your teammates, and that will offer cues as to how you should proceed or not proceed in that offensive standing, in that possession. Kinesthetic, that's just your body moving. One of the things in basketball that I've been thinking about a lot lately, one of my favorite commentators says, is you can't shoot the ball and think at the same time. And I think that high level athletes, elite athletes, are at such a point in their physical development and muscle memory that they don't have to think about the motions. Just like you don't have to think about breathing or walking. When you can take that component of having to think before you move out of the equation, it just opens up the game and slows the game down a whole lot more for you. So I think that kinesthetic piece is extremely important for that reason. Olfactory, if we're going with the definition of touch, then that is going to be, once again, in a basketball situation, if a defender's right up on you, sometimes you can kind of feel it. It's kind of weird to say, but anyone who's played basketball will know what I'm talking about. You can feel where the defender is putting most of their weight, or you can almost feel if you have them off balance, just based off the pressure they're putting on your body on one side of your body or the other, or their positioning. And then also with olfactory, just dealing with the ball in your hands. When it comes to receiving a pass, passing the ball, and most especially shooting or a layup, getting that touch on there, olfactory is everything. Just having a high IQ when it comes to the physics of the game. With gustatory, same thing. I'm not quite sure. Is that having to do with kind of your gut feeling or your instinct?
No, that's the sense of smell, actually.
Oh, I was thinking gastro. Okay. Gustatory, I'm gonna say, hmm, that one's a little trickier. I'm gonna say, this is gonna be weird, but if you can, if you can smell the BO on yourself, you're tired. You can smell it on your teammates. They're tired. They've played a long, hard game. No, in all seriousness, though, I don't know if this is what you're looking for exactly, but I'm gonna say that just breathing. Obviously, you should be breathing through your nose. Not all of us do, but uh, the importance of breathing, taking everything in, engaging that sense to be present, fully present, kind of like what we've been talking about, is extremely important and extremely overlooked.
Yeah, or even adding on to the gustatory. I mean, not necessarily BO that you talk about, but just sweat in general, like the atmosphere of a court. I noticed when I first walk in, if there's been a game previously played, just the smell of a gym, like that. Usually gyms kind of just have their own smell when people have been working out. Um, just that, or even like if there happens to be concessions in the same building, just the smell of food um, that may be in the gym while you're playing can be a factor as well. I mean, I think it's important to encapsulate all the senses and break down imagery, because usually maybe when an athlete is describing imagery, it's just the physical aspect of it, but then they're not going through of what they're seeing and hearing, and even just what their body is doing in that instance. Um, just having them be more in touch with the moment as well, kind of that mindfulness piece again.
And that's, once again, a lot of correlations between our last call and this one. But once again, this all goes back to our last call when I talked about how high level athletes are able to brush off minor mistakes. They're able to stay in the moment, stay locked in, maintain that focus and that attention and that arousal to the situation that you alluded to earlier, by engaging all of these senses and staying engaged.
Now, our next piece that I will discuss is more diving into the functions of imagery. So there are motivational and cognitive functions, and each of those get broken down into their own individual pieces. So with motivational, there's motivational specific, motivational general mastery, and motivational general arousal. The motivational specific is visualizing specific goals and goal-oriented behaviors. So being the attentional piece about it, with goal setting. Then motivational general mastery is maintaining confidence when imagining performance. Our athletes a lot of the time them imagining it may not translate to physically doing it. So them being prepared and knowing, like, okay, I've ran through this in my mind. I know exactly what needs to be executed on the court. And then motivational general arousal is being able to achieve positivism or optimism. Uh, Athletes a lot of the time are not optimistic about their performance or don't see the bigger picture when performing. Then on the cognitive side of the function of imagery is the cognitive specific and cognitive general. Cognitive specific focuses on the motor skills of performance, just exactly what individual muscle or body part, how that is involved in a sports skill. And then cognitive general is the rehearsal of game plans, strategies, or routines that are inherent to competition. So all the time you'll see athletes stretching beforehand, or each team kind of has their own warm-up routine. Even at the college and professional level, you'll separate by positions and doing those specific warm-up drills between the guards and post players. Any thoughts on those concepts?
Um, just I guess the one thing that stands out is the importance of who you're surrounding yourself with in a given instance, in a given moment, to create or help create a certain result that you're looking for. So as you mentioned, like running a drill with someone who's in the same position as you, that's going to help you get more closely into the mind state that you should be in that position. If you're a center hanging out with a bunch of point guards and running drills with a bunch of point guards, most likely, you're not going to get warmed up properly for what you need to be doing on the court in that game. If you're hanging around a bunch of centers, a bunch of like-minded people, so to say, you're going to be a lot more better prepared for the occasion, and you're going to get into that headspace a lot easier, and just do what you need to do once again without having to think about it as much.
My biggest emphasis on that, I tell my athletes, is the pressure that you're going to receive in a game. Knowing that you typically guard people the same position or same size as you, warming up with your other post players, your other guards that are on your team, like you know how to handle the pressure of an opposing player versus your teammate who you practice with every day, and maybe you're not applying that full pressure on each other in practice. Then in a game, you understand what that pressure feels like with even a bigger or stronger person up against you. So another model that is used with imagery and physical performance is a PETLEP model. So it's an acronym. So it's PETTLEP. The first P is physical. E is environment. First T is task. Second T is timing. L is learning. E is emotion, and P is perspective. So all of these factors heighten the relationship between imagery and physical performance. With the physical environment, how is the athlete positioned on the court, how their teammates are, the environment, just those internal and external distractors, surroundings that we've talked about. The task, like what play is being drawn up, what maybe the time and score on the clock, like what has to be done in that specific situation. And timing, like everything has to be in its appropriate timing and execution. If you happen to inbound the ball too early, that can mess up whatever rotation or screens that are being set on the court for somebody. Learning, imagery itself is a learning process. Not everyone's not going to perfect it or be amazing at it their first go around. So just learning that depending on what the skill is, they can achieve it in their own time. And then emotion, sports in itself is in a very emotional process, and being able to imagine or change the way someone may have reacted to a situation can help them. And then perspective, that first and third person perspective I had talked about. Situations are totally different when it's the individual executing it in a game, and then that third person perspective comes in with an example of athletes watching game film of themselves. They see a totally different perspective or understand the game a whole lot differently when they're seeing themselves from an outside view of it all. One kind of topic that came up in my class Zoom call the other day was how technology is being incorporated with imagery, and specifically VR and that immersive experience with imagery. I've had the experience of, there's a facility in our area called 360 Shoot, and it's not necessarily the immersive VR experience, but it is with screens, and it's interactive where it shows different targets for an athlete to pass to, or different ways of shooting, and just that interactive experience. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of thoughts do you have on that, or how do you think technology can advance imagery in sports?
I mean, it's a yes and no for me. I mean, there's nothing like the moment of being in a game and there's a defender so close to you, they're breathing on you, and that intensity of the shot clock about to hit zero and you got to make a play. And once again, there's actual people right in front of you. There's nothing like that. Nothing that can really top that. But with that being said, if you don't have access to that kind of an opportunity 24/7, which most people don't, then a virtual opportunity is very attractive. Just because as close as possible, you can put yourself in that situation and keep yourself in that situation and that intensity for as long as you want and practice that scenario over and over and over again. Where if you did that with actual human beings, it's not very realistic. I mean, if you want to go insane with your training, this is a random example. I mean, if you're obsessed with your training, you could practice a a, a 24 second shot clock violation type of possession, to win the game over and over and over again for 8+ hours with virtual reality. But if you tried to do that with people, I don't think you're gonna have much luck because people are gonna get tired, they're gonna get annoyed, they have other commitments they've got to attend to. So I just think virtual in lieu of the real thing is a very positive opportunity.
And
But once again, I've just got to reiterate, there's nothing like the actual, real life moment.
and one thing our professor did emphasize in that discussion with my classmates was technology can assist in imagery. It doesn't necessarily have to take over. Knowing the technical age that we are in, and technology kind of enhancing all aspects of our lives, not just sports, but being able to use imagery and technology like hand in hand in tandem. So one last kind of activity with imagery I want to run through with you. We can just do a couple of these. Is an imagery evaluation. So there are 4 scenarios on here. We can just do 1 or 2 if you'd like. So based on the scenario, you create an image of each situation that you imagine to make it seem real. Think of specific examples of the skill, people involved, and the time and place for it. And then there's tables at each of these scenarios that you'll rate based on that. So with this first situation is select a specific skill or situation in your sport. Imagine yourself performing the activity in the place where you would normally practice with anyone else present. Now close your eyes for about a minute. Try to see yourself at this place, hear the sounds, feel the body movements, and be aware of your mood. I'll give you just 30 seconds for that. You think you got it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now you can rate how well you saw yourself performing the activity
I'm gonna say a 3,
and hearing the sounds,
4,
felt yourself performing the activity, how
I'm gonna
real
say
was,
a 2,
how well aware of your mood were you,
a 4,
and then controlled of your image.
a 2.
All right. Now the second one. You're performing the same activity as in situation 1, but this time the coach and your teammates are present. You make a mistake that everyone notices. Now close your eyes. We'll do 30 seconds. And imagine making the error and what occurs immediately afterward. Okay. So same kind of rating system here. How well you saw yourself in that image.
3,
Hearing the sounds.
4,
Felt yourself making the movements.
3,
The emotions felt.
5,
Oh, and the control of your image again.
3.
I see with the emotions piece that was very, very high. Can you explain a little bit what that felt like?
Yeah, just shame and embarrassment, because obviously you're making in this scenario a mistake that everyone notices.
Mhm.
So not only am I being hard on myself, but I'm hearing, seeing, visualizing the responses of my teammates and the fans and all that.
Yes, that is. So it can be a heavy experience for someone, um, especially if maybe they've just had one mistake, but then the rest of their game is great. They typically just stay focused on that one mistake, and I think that defined their performance for that game. Well, thank you for doing that. Now, kind of wrapping up this conversation, what are maybe 2 or 3 takeaways you took from our discussion?
I think just the reiterance of the importance of imagery. Once again, as I mentioned pretty early on in this call, I think imagery goes perfectly hand in hand with what we talked about last call, which is just goal setting in general and, overcoming challenges. Uh, I think my other takeaway would be the importance of surrounding yourself with like-minded people that share the same goals,
Hmm.
um, so that you can kind of have a support system, so to speak, in that imagery, in that visualization, um, just to help you along the way.
Those are great. Thank you for your time. We hopefully will get together in a couple weeks for our next topic. So hope you have a great evening and thank you again.
All right. Thank you.